Hello everybody, video here for you today. This is the No Cap recap of the new Oak Island companion show series, Tales from Oak Island, Season 1, Episode 1, called The Article. Originally aired November 19th, 2024. The show will likely not contain any breaking news on current events, but could shed new light on Oak Island's history and previous discoveries. It appears there will be some footage previously used in the main show, but also new narration and new interviews with the cast and other researchers. If you are new to the Oak Island mystery, this show will probably be a great way to catch up. You can also catch up with my Oak Island content, including recaps of every show, except for the second half of Season 7 and all of Season 8, but I'm working on those as I have time. There's a link to my Oak Island playlist in the upper right. Let's get into it. Previously, on the Curse of Oak Island, people have been looking for an incredible treasure for 229 years. The article in question is the 5-page 1965 Reader's Digest article about the treasure search on Oak Island that Rick Lagina read back then and showed to his younger brother Marty. I read a later reprint of the same article when I was around 10 years old. There's a link to my read-along video of that article in the upper right. The show will apparently be using a lot of AI type images, which are marked with a digitally generated image disclaimer. The first accompanies narrator Robert Clotworthy explaining that the treasure hunt first began in 1795 when Daniel McGinnis came across a depression on the eastern side of Oak Island, Nova Scotia. Above the depression was a decayed block and tackle hanging from an oak tree. Shown here in a reenactment, McGinnis and two friends excavated the depression and encountered platforms of wooden logs at both 10 and 20 feet. Due to the 1600s and 1700s being the heyday of pirates in the North Atlantic, the most prevalent theory was that it was buried treasure. The most likely suspect was Captain Kidd, the first pirate known to bury treasure. Some of his loot was found on Gardiner's Island off of New York State, but some of it remains missing. Shortly before he was hung for his crimes, he admitted to burying treasure east of Boston. Nova Scotia is northeast of Boston. In 1804, McGinnis and his friends, along with a wealthy doctor, formed the Onslow Company to excavate the money pit. They continued to encounter oak log platforms every 10 feet at each interval to the 90-foot level. There, they also saw a stone slab carved with unknown characters on it. The 90-foot stone was never photographed and vanished in the 1930s. The lore says that the slab was deciphered by a cryptologist as saying 40 feet below, 2 million pounds are buried. Not in the show, but I thought I would give equal time to another translation. At 80 feet, guide corn, long narrow sea inlet drain, dash F. The letter F was thought to mean Sir Francis Bacon. And the guide corn part is suspected to be a way of soaking up the water and blocking the flood tunnel that's about to be mentioned next. The Onslow Company removed the stone and probed below it, striking a hard, flat surface 10 feet below. They stopped for the night, and when they returned in the morning, the money pit shaft was filled with 60 feet of water. The belief is that they triggered a mechanism that flooded the pit. The Onslow Company was unable to clear the water out of the pit. They even tried digging a shaft called Shaft 2, highly prominent in seasons 7 and 12, with Shaft 1 being the original money pit. The thought was to dig Shaft 2 14 feet from the money pit and deeper to 110 feet and then tunnel to the money pit in an effort to avoid flooding. The digging went without incident, but the tunnel flooded just short of the money pit and also flooded shaft 2. After that, the Onslow Company gave up in 1805. Getting flooded out or collapsing digs has thwarted every searcher group since. After Daniel McGinnis had passed, his friends John Smith and Anthony Vaughan, one of which is thought to be Samuel Ball by some, formed the Churro Company 44 years later in 1849. Samuel Ball is the subject of the next episode of Tales from Oak Island. The Churro Company found that the Smith's Cove beach east of the money pit was man-made and contained 5 stone box trains that converged into a single tunnel leading to the money pit area. Coconut fiber was used as a filter system to keep the drains free of debris. The closest coconut trees were 1,200 miles south in Florida. They attempted to block the water, including trying to blow up the box trains with dynamite. The Truro Company also tried digging a new shaft called Shaft 6 and tunneling to the money pit, but that tunnel and shaft not only flooded, but was believed to have caused both the money pit and the shaft to collapse. The Truro Company disbanded in 1861, and various unsuccessful searcher groups kept trying their luck on the island. In 1893, Frederick Blair got involved and collected every bit of information he could about the island and previous searcher groups. In 1897, Blair and driller William Chappell drilled down to 153 feet, at which point they hit what they thought to be a layer of cement, then wood. When the drill bit was brought up to the surface, it had gold flakes on it, and this piece of parchment with the letters VI on it. The suspected wooden box that was drilled into is referred to as the Chappell Vault. Unfortunately, that was the most significant thing that group was able to do. More unsuccessful groups followed, including one with future U.S. President Franklin Delano Roosevelt. After the history was presented in the article, it focused on the search in progress at the time of the writing, which was done by former daredevil Robert Restall and his family, who moved to the island so they could work full-time to solve the mystery. There was no electricity on the island at the time, but they were able to do things like listen to the radio and wash clothes by connecting a battery to those devices. Robert and older son Bobby investigated previous shafts, but also ran into the flooding problem, so eventually turned their focus to finding the flood tunnel from Smith's Cove. In 1964, after the Restalls had been on the island for almost 5 years, article writer David McDonald visited the island in order to write it. Once it was published, Restall got many offers from people that wanted to invest in the search, but he turned most of them down. At the urging of Mel Chappell, who was William's son, Oak Island owner, and partner of Restall, he did agree to work with geologist Robert Dunfield, who paid $5,000 for permission to operate a bulldozer at Smith's Cove. Dunfield began doing much more than that, though, including the most destructive dig ever on Oak Island. In August of 1965, Robert was looking into the shaft they were working on when he fell in, overcome by toxic gas. Bobby went down the ladder after him, but eventually succumbed to the gas himself. 2 other men that attempted a rescue also died. 2 that followed them survived their attempts. Charles Barkhouse, in one of those new interviews I spoke of, said it was probably hydrogen sulfide. They do not show it on the main show, but the Laguna Group and their subcontractors do check for dangerous gases often. Robert Dunfield was given full control of search operations on Oak Island by Mel Chappell, since he believed that massive digs with heavy equipment were long overdue. That opened the door for Dan Blankenship, a contractor from Florida and Ohio before that. After reading the article, Dan told his wife that he thinks he will be instrumental in finding the treasure. Dan's investment with Dunfield paid for the construction of the causeway between the island and the mainland, allowing for heavy equipment to be delivered. Before that, everything would have to arrive via the water. Dunfield used a crane with a 100-foot boom and a clamshell bucket to excavate 100 feet wide and 137 feet down in the money pit area. Not mentioned is that the dig was cone-shaped, so it was only a few feet wide at the bottom, which is how he missed many things that have been discovered since. He was also plagued by the hole repeatedly collapsing. By the end of 1966, Dunfield's contract was up, allowing Dan Blankenship and David Tobias to take over operations on the island. They would eventually own most of the island until the Laguna Group became their partners. Dan built a cofferdam in Smith's Cove to try to locate the flood tunnel. He uncovered the U-shaped structure. And also these 300-year-old scissors from Spain. One of the treasure theories is that it could have been buried on Oak Island by the Spanish or people from any other country that were transporting South American riches back to the Old World. It's plausible to think a group of sailors could have decided to keep some or even everything for themselves instead of giving it to the king and queen. Also, several of those ships were lost at sea, or at least were thought to be. One of Dan Blankenship's shining moments is a water pump test borehole he drilled nearly 180 feet east from the money pit that he named 10X. He widened it to a 27-inch diameter and lowered a camera to the bottom at 230 feet underground. In these images from it, Dan thought he saw 2 chests and a human body. Over the next 20 years, Dan, his son Dave Danhinsky, and another man widened 10X to an 8-foot diameter and lessened the chances of collapse by lining it with repurposed railroad tanker cars, but only to 180 feet. As always, time is undefeated, and Dan was suddenly in his 70s in the year 2000. In 2006, a new generation of searchers partnered with Dan again thanks to that 1965 Reader's Digest article. The Laguna Group did a bunch of investigation into 10X, but despite multiple dives to the bottom, nothing was recovered. The highlight of the first season of The Curse of Oak Island was in episode 5, the season finale, with the find of a Spanish 8 Cobb Maravedí coin, dated 1652, 143 years before the discovery of the money pit. And that was discovered in the swamp. They took it to Dan's house, and he said, "You know, this is the first thing I've held in my hands after 48 years of being here, but you have to give us credit for perseverance." In 2016, the team found a number of British coins and pieces of musket rifles, all dating to the mid-1700s, also before the discovery of the money pit in 1795. The thinking is that it was an English military camp. These other finds after that expanded the suspect list to include the French military, Freemasons, and the medieval order of the Knights Templar. In 2019, mentor and partner Dan Blankenship passed. Over the years, the Laginas have added experts in a number of disciplines, including geology with Terry Matheson, archaeology with Laird Niven, metallurgy with Emma Culligan, and geoscience with Dr. Ian Spooner, who in 2020 got high trace amounts of silver in quite a few boreholes in the Money Pit area, and a well on Lot 26 that he carbon dated to 1200 AD. The following year, he was able to test for gold as well, which yielded similar results. Since then, he is constantly getting the same readings from the water, even in the first 2 episodes of season 12. He says it cannot be this high of a reading and not still be there, and also it's not naturally occurring gold. 2 other geoscientists confirmed it. In 2023/season 11, the water is still undefeated on Oak Island as water flooded a newly refurbished searcher shaft as contractors were probe drilling to determine a direction to tunnel to instead of dig. The water was salty, so that would indicate a flood tunnel from Mahone Bay instead of a natural spring. 4 years before Dan Blankenship's passing, the team invited the article author, David McDonald, to the island. Dan's son Dave greets the author with, "So you're the one that caused all this trouble." Without that article, neither Dan Blankenship nor Lagina team would have been on the island. I'll continue No Cap recaps of The Curse of Oak Island late Tuesday night as the new episodes air, and this show, Tales from Oak Island, a few days later. My Oak Island playlist is in the upper right. Thanks so much for watching. Please subscribe, like, and comment. Sempre avanti.